Okay, so for tonight's quick, simple video, I would really like to discuss what are the different types of platforms that could be used for supporting a group of people offshore for a long period. What types of platforms have been invented and built and used in the past to support a population, a small group or a larger group of people offshore? What if you wanted to host a group of people, or if you wanted to have your own, floating island 12 more than 12 miles offshore? Could you do it? What would it take? And well, I'm here to tell you there are certain types of structures that have been invented mostly by the oil and gas industries that can provide safe environment, for like a living environment for people for a long duration. And typically these structures are supported by resupply ships. And you know, a lot of these structures have existed for decades, and typically when they get old, they either get refurbished or removed. And for reasons that I don't know why, um, the the oil companies that own these huge rigs, they don't typically try to auction them off or get people to purchase them. They're usually removed at the end of their useful life and disassembled, dismantled, and sold for scrap. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the different types of oil structures that exist and how they're built and what they're good for, the depths that they're good for, and the environments. And we'll take a look at all the different types of technologies. Okay, so this is literally just a Google image search of types of oil rigs. I'm keeping it simple for you here. I mean, this is research that you could see yourself just Googling it. And in this image up here, on the top right here, there's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven different examples of different types of designs. Now, keep in mind there are subtypes of most of these different types. So, it might show, like, say, for example, the spar tower on the right hand side, but there's a subtype of spar towers that have a lattice structure beneath that extends the depth so you can put a solid mass at the bottom to stabilize the spar tower at an even further depth. So, I mean, that's just an example. So let's start with the structure on the left here. That's a tripod jacket. Now, the jacket, a lot of times the word jacket is used for the underwater structure of an oil rig. And in this case, it's the underwater structure for what looks like a wind turbine, obviously. So this is typically a metal structure. And this says it can be used in depths from 0 up to 160-foot depth. Now, 160 feet sounds like it's pretty far, but honestly, it's not. It's not super far. So that's supposed to be about 50 meters. That's not considered a very deep, area in the ocean. So, the next one over, we have a fixed platform, and this diagram looks like a really huge one, and this says for depths up to 150 meters, so basically 500-ish feet. And that would be a really tall structure. If you see what these things look like in real life, let me see. I wanna actually find a picture of how big a fixed platform can be. I'm going to duplicate this one. I'm going to say um, oil fixed platform rig jacket. Yeah. So like this one, for example, that's just a 3D image. I want to show you a real one. Here we go. That's also a 3D image. There are some incredible images out there of how huge, here we go, how huge these are. Look at this ship and some of these steel jackets. It's amazing. They can actually tow this out there and somehow flip it over. And supposedly these are good for a depth of up to about 50 meters or 150 feet or so. Okay, so that's the fixed platform. And then when you want to go for a, you know, deeper water, you have something called the compliant tower. Now, the compliant tower is similar to the fixed platform. It's very similar to the fixed platform, but it has some very key differences. It's very important to understand the difference with the compliant tower versus the fixed platform. A fixed platform, that huge kind of A-frame shaped jacket could exist pretty much stably on land and support a structure above it. It doesn't really rely on the water. It acts entirely against the water. A compliant tower is relying on the buoyancy. It actually has buoyancy built into the tubes of the structure, and they can build these much further depths. Now, the tallest compliant tower ever made was the Petronius Tower, which was installed in 1997. So, wow, what is that? More than 25 years ago. 27 years ago. So, I think the age of compliant towers is pretty much eclipsed. So, like, they're not really building these that much. I think um, yeah, they haven't really pushed the limits for compliant towers anymore because now they have better technologies to go into deeper water. So the next one is the TLP. What does TLP mean? TLP, well, that stands for Tension Leg Platform. And I love this design. I think these are great. This is such a cool design. So basically, you have basically it's what's called a semi-submersible platform. It's a buoyant metal structure with pillars connected at the bottom, and they rise up out of the water, and then there's a platform at the top. But then underneath this semi-submersible platform are cables sticking straight down to the seafloor. It's not like anchor cables. It's not like mooring cables. These are tension cables. They somehow manage to plug them into the sea floor. It must be at great expense and difficulty to get these tensioned cables to stick to the sea floor because they're under enormous amounts of tension for many years with waves lifting up the structure and pulling against them, and they stay tight. They hold tight for many years, and that's a really cool idea. So those are only good though for depths of up to 5,000 feet, and that's about 1,500 meters. So, I mean, these few designs that we've talked about so far, there's not a lot of places that are 12 miles offshore that are only 1,500 meters. Well, once you get to 1,500 meters, okay, that starts to be useful. But where you really start to get a versatile platform is when you have a semi-submersible platform. These things are good for up to 10,000 feet of depth. And that's basically 3,000 meters. So that's extremely far. You can go very far out off the coast of, even when there's really deep water, extreme, difference in the depth when you go offshore, like 3,000 meters, that's a far way out off of pretty much any coast in the world. So the semi-submersible platform, without being a tension leg version, is typically just floating out there with it's basically it's like I described, the metal structure with um, metal pillars connected at the bottom, connected at the top, and then your living structure and work structure is at the top. So the difference with not being a tension leg platform and just being a semi-submersible is these just have mooring cables. They're loose mooring cables. There's typically maybe 8 to 12 or more mooring cables, and they basically come straight down, go out, and then stop, and then they're anchored in. They're well permanently moored into the sea floor. So, and that image right here, this one with the semi-submersible platform, it shows basically either a drilling rig or some kind of suction device to pull oil out, like an oil derrick or something. Of course, for seasteaders, we don't need that stuff. We're just trying to float out there, right? We're just trying to build a base or a colony, a community. So we don't need like some of the heavy machinery, industrial machinery. We want more of a comfortable living environment. So after that semi-submersible platform, drill ship. Drill ships are interesting because they do have some great technology to stay level and stable, even in fairly rough conditions. Now, drill ships don't operate in extremely rough conditions, but they do have some great technology, thrusters and ballast, and there's a bunch of different strategies to keep the ships stable in fairly rough water. But it's not considered a good platform for seasteading because they typically are not moored down permanently. So you would have to have constant propeller running, engine running, and that's just not practical for staying out there permanently. You need to have permanent mooring. So the next type of structure is called spar tower. Now, the spar tower is really considered to be the best. I mean, it is like the gold standard of having a floating island on the ocean because it is the most versatile. It is the most stable, and you can moor it down in depths of up to, and this says 3,500 meters, 12,000 feet. So, yeah, you don't have to be anywhere near the shore. So, spar platforms are pretty amazing. Now, let's talk about the cost of these things. In general, the largest oil rigs, they're pretty much always in the billions of dollars now. And obviously, like, the oil and gas industries can afford multi-billion-dollar structures. It's not just the cost of building it, but also the cost of installing it, and then especially the cost of maintaining it. Now, if you have a metal structure offshore in the ocean, well, that thing's going to corrode. They have ways to slow down corrosion so that it's not as serious, but corrosion's going to happen, and eventually it will get serious. So you have ways to slow it down, but a steel structure in the ocean is going to rust, and it can have a devastating effect if it's not being maintained. So these spar towers, the spar itself underneath the surface is very far down. And typically, you cannot send divers down to maintain these structures. They're just too far down. So and then the bone crushing pressure will make it impossible. Um, you know, perhaps there are robots and ROVs that could go down and do some of the maintenance work, but when it comes to heavy duty like scraping, sandblasting, painting, huge surface area underwater, which is what it is. I mean, that spar, like in this image here, and mm, so like this image here, this is a tension leg, but this is a huge amount of surface area to be painted. And that's one of the biggest problems we have with seasteading is, how can you maintain that? So one thing that's really cool, and I really imagine that you could, the same way that you lift the topside structure onto the flotation structure, you could actually bring out a new flotation structure, a new spar, and move the whole thing from the old one to the new one, and then take the old one back to the shipyard and lay it flat, bring it onto the shore, and maintain it. Sandblast it and repaint it. But that would be, enormously expensive, obviously. Of course, it wouldn't have to be done very often. So another way to do it would be to use a concrete structure. A concrete structure can stay in the ocean for decades. It does need to be inspected and maintained, but a concrete structure does not need to have a comprehensive maintenance regime. It doesn't need to be removed from the water, so to speak. So let's take a look at some of these other diagrams we have here. Fixed platform, compliant tower, tension leg, conventional tension leg, truss spar. These are cool. Wow, mini, DOC, classic spar, cell spar. Those are cool too. It's like a spar, but it has multiple spars connected to each other side by side. And yeah, I mean, it's more resilient. If one gets damaged, like hopefully the whole entire island doesn't sink. And then you have an FPSO. Now, an FPSO is a huge ship that is permanently moored. And that's another interesting idea, an FPSO, because you can moor basically a gigantic ship that's very stable because it's so huge. And you can moor that in the middle of the ocean. And as a matter of fact, they do have one. Let's see. Let's get a picture of that. Show FPSO Prelude. This one. You can see how big this oil ship is. And then there's the FPSO platform. I believe that cost like $500 million at the time. It's really cool how it works. It's got this turret shape, and the turret thing is moored to the seafloor. So it spins around that. The ship can spin around it. Now there is a prevailing current, so it's usually going the same direction. But if the current did change, it's not going to hurt anything. So look how enormous the structure is. And this is just floating pretty much like a ship. It's designed to be out there pumping natural gas, I believe, for 20 years. Um, it's off the coast of Australia. It's very far off the coast of Australia, but that's the closest landmass, I believe, to where they have it stationed. So anyway, those are some of the basic conceptual designs. If you wanted to establish a town or a colony or some kind of community offshore, that's the basic designs that are available so far, and perhaps there could be some other designs, but I wouldn't really expect a whole lot more because the oil and gas industry has pretty much unlimited resources, right? And if you look at this map right here, this is just the Gulf of Mexico. It's just one area on planet Earth where oil and gas is pumped out of the ocean floor. It's one of the biggest, of course, but just in this area alone, there's been 6,000 different oil and gas platforms installed since over the last 60, 70 years since they started installing them. Now, I think there's currently around 2,500-ish that still exist. If you zoom into this map that I found on Google, it's actually at arcgis.com, but the gray lines are undersea pipelines, and the dark blue dots are oil platforms that have been removed, and the light blue dots are platforms that are currently in service. So, wow, water depth only 174. How about this one? Water depth 190. That's not that deep, huh? It's pretty far out. Oh, but you can see there's a shelf here, and then some of these get really far out. Installed 2003. Water depth 3,150 feet. That is far, man, and expensive. So anyway, if you have any questions about the different types of rig designs that could be used for floating islands and offshore colonization, please drop a comment below. I'd love to have a discussion with you. All right, talk to you later.